What if I told you that some boat manufacturers didn't just fade into US history, they earned their spot on the scrap heap? Welcome to Worst Boat Manufacturers That Faded into US History, where we expose 8 brands that sank their own reputations. These companies promised style, value, or innovation, but delivered stress cracks, soggy decks, electrical nightmares, and broken dreams. Take this ride with us to find out which particular brand even used their name for fame but claimed seagoing notoriety. Let's kick off with Imperial Boats, a name that promised big things in the world of affordable family runabouts, but ultimately became a cautionary tale on how cutting corners can sink a brand. Founded in Florida, Imperial Boats set out to capture the booming boating market of the 1960s through the 1980s. Their pitch? Deliver sleek, stylish boats at a price that middle-class families could afford. And at first glance, Imperial Boats looked the part. With clean lines, attractive upholstery, and plenty of features for the money, they drew buyers in with flashy brochures and budget-friendly price tags. But it didn't take long for the cracks, both literal and figurative, to show. Owners soon found that Imperial's thin fiberglass hulls flexed excessively under load, causing stress cracks, and in some cases, structural concerns. The hardware, cleats, railings, latches looked shiny on day one, but often corroded, loosened, or broke after just a season or two on the water. Interiors that appeared plush at the showroom began to degrade quickly under sun and spray, with seats cracking and carpeting peeling far sooner than buyers expected. Even worse, when owners sought support, parts were hard to source and warranties weren't always honored. The brand's reputation plummeted as word spread that these boats simply didn't hold up. By the early 1990s, Imperial was finished. Their attempt to build boats on the cheap backfired, and the company vanished from the market. Today, what's left are tired, aging hulls often found on Craigslist or sitting neglected at marinas. Reminders that value pricing means nothing if the product can't stand the test of time. If you spot an Imperial today, think twice. The low purchase price on a used one could hide a sea of costly repairs just waiting to surface. Also, if you're finding this eye-opening so far, subscribe now, because the deeper we go, the worse it gets. And trust me, the final 2 boats on this list, they're the kind of disasters you really don't want to miss. Stay tuned, because what's coming ahead will make you think twice before buying these boats. Let's move on to Maxim Boats, a brand that tried to carve out a space between budget and premium, but ended up lost at sea. Maxim was launched by Brunswick Corporation in the late 1980s as an attempt to bridge the gap between their entry-level Bayliner models and the more upscale Sea Ray line. The idea was sound: offer a boat that gave customers more style and features than a Bayliner, but at a price that didn't reach Sea Ray territory. And at first glance, Maxim Boats seemed to deliver. They had sleek designs, stylish interiors, and marketing that positioned them as the smart buyer's choice. But here's where it fell apart. Maxim didn't carve out a clear identity. Were they a budget brand with a fancy badge, or a premium brand on a diet? Buyers weren't sure, and worse, neither was the company. Many Maxim models came with hardware that felt no better than what you'd find on a Bayliner. Early models were notorious for minor but frustrating issues: leaky deck fittings, rattling hatches, and electrical gremlins that left owners cursing on the water. Some hulls were prone to flexing more than competitors in the same size range, raising concerns about long-term durability. Maxim struggled to build loyalty. Buyers who wanted premium went to Sea Ray, budget-minded shoppers stuck with Bayliner. And when the 2008 financial crisis hit, Brunswick made the call. Maxim was axed in 2009. Today, Maxim Boats can still be found on the used market, often at tempting prices, but buyers beware. While they're not outright terrible, they embody the risks of a brand that never truly figured out what it wanted to be. That confusion led to compromises that owners ended up paying for, sometimes literally. Let's talk about Celebrity Boats, a brand that drew buyers in with flashy designs and sporty marketing, but couldn't deliver where it mattered most: long-term quality and durability. Celebrity Boats hit the scene aiming to attract recreational boaters who wanted style and performance without paying premium brand prices. Their boats often featured aggressive lines, eye-catching graphics, and interiors that looked upscale compared to many competitors at first glance. On the showroom floor, Celebrity Boats seemed like a fantastic deal, but take them out on the water, or try to maintain them over a few seasons, and the weaknesses became clear. Many Celebrity models were built with stringer systems that were prone to rot, especially where the factory failed to properly seal wood components. Stress cracks in the hulls and decks weren't uncommon, especially after a few years of regular use. Owners reported flexing in rough conditions, something no one wants to feel at speed. Deck hardware often wasn't up to the task. Rails, cleats, and latches looked good at first, but corroded or failed after exposure to sun and salt. And because Celebrity focused so much on styling over substance, their boats gained a reputation for looking great dockside, but disappointing when put to the test. By the mid-1990s, Celebrity couldn't keep up with better-built competitors. Resale values tanked, owners grew frustrated with repair costs, and the brand quietly disappeared. Today, you might still see Celebrity Boats for sale, often at bargain bin prices. But beneath that shiny gel coat could be a boat needing major structural work. If you're hunting for a used boat, Celebrity is a name that should make you pause. Because in boating, looks mean nothing if the build underneath can't back them up. Next up, let's take a hard look at Swirl Boats, a brand that tried to give offshore dreamers a wallet-friendly ticket to the water, but too often delivered frustration instead of fun. Swirl built boats aimed at the weekend fisherman, small families, and first-time buyers. Their models, especially in the 1980s and 1990s, offered decent space, simple layouts, and prices that undercut many competitors. On the surface, it seemed like a winning formula, reliable enough to get you out on the water without breaking the bank. But buyers soon discovered where the cost savings came from. One of the most common complaints about Swirl was poor electrical systems. Wiring looms were often messy and unprotected, leading to shorts, failures, and constant troubleshooting headaches for owners. The hardware, things like cleats, railings, and hinges, was functional at first, but tended to corrode or loosen quickly, especially in saltwater environments. Fit and finish left much to be desired. Gel coat cracking, misaligned hatches, and leaky fittings were issues that popped up more frequently than they should have. Perhaps most frustrating for owners was that the boats just didn't age well. What seemed like small issues in the first year or two could snowball into bigger problems. Water intrusion leading to soft decks, rusted wiring causing electrical gremlins, and stress cracks that multiplied with use. Swirl eventually faded out, unable to compete with better-built rivals who delivered more reliability for just a bit more money. Today, the name lingers mostly in the used market, where smart buyers know to approach with caution. Because when a boat's biggest strength is its low price, you often find out too late what that bargain really cost. Also, if you're learning what to avoid, subscribe now, because the last few boats on this list, they're the ones you really can't afford to miss. Let's move on to the Wellcraft Laguna series, a name that tried to challenge legends like Boston Whaler, but instead ended up as a footnote in boating history. The Laguna line was Wellcraft's answer to the growing demand for center consoles and fishing boats that combined ruggedness with family-friendly features. On paper, Laguna models had potential: solid fiberglass hulls, practical layouts, and enough deck space to attract both serious anglers and weekend boaters. The marketing pitched them as tough, versatile, and ready for anything, but out on the water, the flaws started to show. Laguna boats were heavier than they needed to be, making them sluggish and less fuel-efficient compared to their Whaler and Grady White rivals. The layouts often left serious fishermen frustrated. Live wells were poorly placed, storage could be awkward, and some deck hardware felt like an afterthought rather than purpose-built. Quality control varied between models. Some Lagunas had decent fit and finish, while others showed sloppy rigging and small but nagging issues like leaky hatches or weak electrical systems. Perhaps the biggest problem was resale. Lagunas simply didn't hold their value. Buyers who started with a Laguna often upgraded to something better as soon as they could, leaving a fleet of used models that struggled to find second owners. By the late 1990s, Wellcraft quietly phased out the Laguna line. The boats just couldn't compete on performance, quality, or reputation. Today, the Laguna name rarely comes up except in used boat listings, and when it does, savvy buyers know to inspect carefully before making a deal. Because in a world where fishing boats have to prove their toughness, the Laguna series came up short, and that's why it faded into US boating history. Let's talk about Steelcraft Boats, a brand that promised indestructibility, but delivered maintenance nightmares and performance headaches that sank its future. Steelcraft, built primarily in Canada but sold heavily in northern US markets, targeted boaters who wanted something rugged. Instead of fiberglass or wood, Steelcraft boats were made with, you guessed it, steel. At a glance, this seemed like a genius idea. Steel hulls could take a beating, shrug off minor dings, and power through rough northern waters. But buyers quickly learned that steel on the water came with major drawbacks. Steel hulls were incredibly heavy. That weight meant Steelcraft boats were sluggish, burned more fuel, and required larger engines to achieve the same performance as lighter fiberglass competitors. Rust was a constant enemy. Even the most careful owners found themselves fighting corrosion, especially in saltwater or brackish environments. Maintaining a Steelcraft meant endless hours of scraping, painting, and patching. The market moved on. As fiberglass technology advanced, it offered equal strength without the weight and maintenance burden. Steelcraft boats became dinosaurs in a world that now prized efficiency, ease of upkeep, and speed. Steelcraft didn't pivot fast enough. By the 1960s, the brand was fading from boat shows and marinas, left behind as fiberglass became the material of choice. Today, you'll rarely see a Steelcraft on the water, unless it's in the hands of an enthusiast committed to the painstaking task of keeping rust at bay. In the end, Steelcraft's boats weren't bad because they were weak. They were bad because they were too heavy, too high maintenance, and simply outclassed by the future of boating. The brand sank under the weight of its own good intentions, becoming another name lost to history. Let's dive into the story of Chrysler Boats, a classic case of a big company thinking it could master boating the same way it mastered cars, only to end up adrift. Chrysler, the automotive giant, entered the boat business in the 1960s, seeing an opportunity to cash in on America's booming interest in recreational boating. They offered everything from small runabouts to larger cruisers, all under the familiar Chrysler badge. And sure, the idea of owning a boat built by a household name had its appeal. But when owners got these boats on the water, the problems started showing. Chrysler boats were heavy and underpowered. Many models struggled to get on plane without pushing engines to their limits, guzzling fuel and delivering lackluster performance. Interiors often featured cheap materials that didn't hold up well to sun, salt, or regular use. Upholstery cracked, carpet peeled, and hardware corroded faster than it should have. Fit and finish were inconsistent. Some boats left the factory well assembled, others seemed slapped together to hit quotas. Perhaps most frustrating, parts and service support were spotty. Chrysler Marine wasn't as committed to its boat owners as it was to car buyers. As warranty issues piled up, many owners felt abandoned. By the early 1980s, Chrysler pulled the plug on its marine division. The boating arm couldn't compete with established builders who truly understood the marine market. Today, Chrysler boats are rare sightings, and when they do pop up, they're often in need of major restoration to overcome decades of wear, design flaws, and neglect. What looked like a smart move by a car maker turned into a lesson. Boating isn't just cars on water, and Chrysler's marine ambition sank because they never truly grasped that. Finally, let's talk about Invader Boats, a brand that promised fun, sporty rides in compact sizes, but often left owners wishing they'd stayed ashore. Invader made its name producing small, flashy boats in the 1970s and 1980s that caught the eye with bold colors and aggressive lines. They were marketed as affordable fun, perfect for zipping around lakes, pulling skiers, or just cruising on sunny afternoons. At first glance, they seemed like a dream come true for first-time boaters looking for excitement without the hefty price tag. But that dream often turned into frustration on the water. Invader boats were notorious for their harsh, choppy rides. The small hulls had shallow dead rises that pounded hard in anything but flat water, wearing out both the driver and passengers after just a short run. Handling left a lot to be desired. The weight distribution on many models was off, making them quirky at speed. Prone to chine walk or sudden handling surprises that could shake a novice's confidence fast. Build quality was basic at best, while the gel coat and graphics turned heads. Underneath were hulls and fittings that didn't stand up well to years of use, especially in saltwater. Stress cracks, soft spots, and hardware failures became common as these boats aged. Invader boats faded out as buyers realized the compromises weren't worth the initial savings. Today, these boats occasionally show up on used listings, often at bargain prices, but usually needing significant work. In the end, Invader's focus on fun and flash came at the expense of ride comfort, handling, and durability. The brand sank into history, leaving behind a reminder that a good deal isn't always a good boat. Here's a fact to leave you thinking. According to marine surveyors, the majority of structural issues found during used boat inspections are tied to brands that cut corners on materials or build quality. In other words, that great deal on an older boat could end up costing you more in repairs than you saved at purchase. That's why knowing the history behind these faded brands matters, because the water has no sympathy for shortcuts. If you found this video helpful, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below. Tell us, which boat brand would you avoid like the plague, and have you had your own horror story with one of these names?